When I said that healthcare was roughly 2 sigma right now, I was being facetious, but it's true. And healthcare as a service, as an IT-enabled service, is really in its infancy. The story I'll start out with is real. A couple of weeks ago in a local hospital, a young mother died on an operating table, bled to death, went into cardiac arrest. And as we usually do in the hospital, when something like that happens, we call a lot of doctors to the scene. Overhead pages and things. And you hope that you get some people with some expertise. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And in this case, what was needed was someone who knew how to cross-clamp an aorta. The number of people who know how to do that is pretty small. And we happened to get it. Most of the time we wouldn't. And so someone did it. The woman's life was saved. She came back. She left the hospital 5 days later. If we hadn't had that expertise, probably, we might have brought her back, but she wouldn't have had many organs working. She would have died a couple of weeks later. So you're not only looking at a child who has a mother, you're looking at a difference between what would have probably been a $1 or $2 million ICU spend versus $10,000 and out of the hospital within a week. So this is the difference in healthcare between 1 sigma or 2 sigma and what we need to strive for. And when you look at communication in healthcare and IT-enabled healthcare, that's what we're really going for. We can go on to the next slide. So the healthcare SIG is saying, okay, if healthcare IT-enabled service is going to happen, which we really hope it will, and if the spend will move up above agriculture, nothing against agriculture, but we feel that there should be some spend in healthcare with IT, then we need to start working on these issues. So Chris has brought together a group of people that can really bridge these gaps between the large companies, the small companies, and academics. And we are focused on quality of care, the experience, which right now in the US is dismal, and many other countries as well. Affordability, which I think follows from reasonable systems, which Jan might even mention since he's in one of the best systems in the world, and professional satisfaction. What we're doing is we said from the beginning, which is roughly 6 months ago, that we would try to address this in 3 phases. And Chris beat on us saying we need to actually do something useful, which I think is true. So we said, okay, let's figure out the concepts first and what we might bring to the table. Then we'll look at development, and then we'll look at how we can implement those kind of solutions. And I'll just talk about conceptual and then hand it off to Jan. We said there needs to be a framework here that we as a group can work with and that we can leverage SRII as a whole, which is a challenge because SRII is a growing organization, and we know that we have a lot of stakeholders at the table, which is great, but actually leveraging that is a challenge. So we said we'll work on unique pain points, and we actually identified as one of the largest pain points meaningful use of data. That's the US term for this idea that we're collecting a lot of data but not using it. And we put in $27 billion toward infrastructure from the federal government, and then a bunch of sticks to penalize people who didn't collect data. And all the government's done is said, we'll collect data, but not how we're going to use it. And they said, okay, the private sector can figure that out, which we're all struggling with. We've been over the last couple of years since this came about. So this we chose to focus on in the conference tomorrow. And as a group, I think we'll be focusing on this as an area of where we can bring expertise. And then understand the stakeholders always necessary in any healthcare work, and building the business case. And then I'll hand it over to Jan.
I know a lot of you are from overseas, so maybe I should tell you a little bit about the system where I work. Our company is called Kaiser Permanente. It's the largest private integrated care system in the U.S. We have about almost 9 million patients, 180,000 employees, and our revenues are about $44 billion. Our IT department alone is over $3 billion. So the thing about Kaiser that's interesting is that we put in, one of the first companies put in a ubiquitous electronic medical record. We started doing that in 2003, step by step, and it's taken 7 years. And it just finished last year. That's a big deal for healthcare in the U.S. Big deal. The second thing is we also have a health portal for patients. About 3.5 million patients use that portal. But in terms of what I do, I'm right on the leading edge of that company because we have a group that looks at new and emerging technologies that are coming to healthcare in about 2 to 5 years. And I just want to illustrate something for you, the dilemma of healthcare and IT. In our innovation center just down the street, we have an OR of the future. It's a simulation OR with a full medical record running with real equipment and everything else in it. It's a design for future hospitals. And one day, I met with a vendor who had a box that would fit into the OR. And he told me, from an engineering point of view, the box was 5 nines reliable. And I'm assuming you guys all know what 5 nines means. It's 99.999% reliable. And I said, that's great, but let me show you something. So I brought him to the OR, the operating room, and I said, what's the, in this OR, you look at this operating room, Dan's the surgeon. In this situation where there's multiple streams of work going on, very chaotic, a lot of information going back and forth, life and death literally at stake. What's the human error rate, human failure rate? Do you guys know? In that kind of situation? It's 25%. 25%. So what does 5 nines get you? Not very much. So I told the vendor, if you really want to get into healthcare, design a box that reduces human error rate. That's a much bigger bang for the buck. Design a box that talks to other boxes to reduce error rate. That's even better. I think those kind of issues in healthcare are what a lot of companies that are now going into healthcare are trying to figure out. And it's going to take a long time to learn because healthcare, as you guys may know, is a very, very complex industry. And it's not so simple as just bringing a database or bringing a cloud service or whatever. So Dan and I will have to tackle that this year. It's going to be a big challenge. And we invite any of you who are very interested to join us. The next stage, just by way of introduction, the next stage for our SIG is the development phase. And in that phase, after we develop a framework, we want to identify opportunities for service innovation in healthcare. And some of the ways that we put up as a possible starting points would be to identify a well-known problem in healthcare that's difficult to solve with current technology and service models. There are such problems. George knows some of these problems. The problem of medication compliance. One of the issues about healthcare is that we provide care in a very expensive venue, the most expensive venue possible in a hospital, in ICU. And in the future, we cannot afford to do that. So we want to take care of people at home, where they work, where they travel. Then we need to make sure that they take their medications the way they're supposed to. Studies have shown that about 79% of people do not take their medications the way they're supposed to. That's almost 80%. So if you give a prescription to somebody, they don't take the medication, what's the point? They're going to end up in the hospital. So that's just one problem. There are many other problems. Ulcers and bed sores for people who don't move enough. Elderly patients who fall is another problem. There are quite a few problems like that. The second point is key barriers to market expansion. And the two that I see are really main problems are integration and interoperability. I just want to point out one thing, which is that in the next 3 years, a lot of physicians in this country will be buying medical records because of federal stimulus funding. In fact, there'll be penalties if they don't do it. So you buy the medical record, and when you, as an IT vendor, bring in technology, guess what? You have to integrate with that record. That's probably the first big barrier for IT companies going to healthcare. Interoperability is another issue, the exchange of information so that you have coordinated care among different kinds of groups. And finally, technology areas in healthcare that lag behind similar areas in other industries. And the classic is people say, I do my banking online, why can't I do my healthcare online? It's like my mobile phone. A lot of issues with mobile phone. And very interesting that one of the issues, for instance, is how do you combine on one device, like an iPad or a phone or something that's totally secure, confidential, going to your provider, like a VPN, plus stuff you can install yourself, like your latest iTunes app or whatever. That's very difficult to do, and that's what we're looking at today. And finally, implementation, actually doing some pilot projects. And The way we envision it, these are well-defined, clearly scoped. They're relatively short-term, maybe relatively limited investment, experimental in nature. And the objective would be to establish some models for cooperation so that we can move the industry forward, gain experience in addressing some discrete challenges, and develop a strategic approach to service innovation. Healthcare as a service has not been very innovative. In fact, the model we use today is the model we used 50 years ago. And we have to change that, because if you look at all the demographic trends, you will not be able to sustain that. And I know that many people around this country know that. The question is, how do you do it? So it's a big challenge, but we invite anybody who's interested to join us. And next slide. We have a team right now that includes Dan and myself. Shisaku is here, and Dan Ganos is going to be here. Dr. Soffer is going to join us tomorrow for our panel. And we'll talk a little bit about meaningful uses, which is one of the big challenges for healthcare today. Thanks.